We can get acquainted as we, get this thing rolling.
You catch your breath.
Yes. Uh, how's the hip doing?
Hip is fine.
We can get acquainted as we,
So hold on.
get this thing
Yep.
rolling.
Let me turn myself off here because I launched the live just to see what's on.
Gotcha.
Hip's good. I had this hematoma that I had from literally day one. It stayed there. They didn't want to drain it. They're trying to avoid getting an infection in the prosthesis in the bone, I guess.
Yeah.
Big nasty hematoma. They didn't want to drain it. So
Ooh.
finally, 7 weeks out, the doc it's still there, but getting better. And
Okay.
the doc wants to drain it. And he goes in at an angle, goes right through my tensor fascia lata, hit a nerve.
Man.
Pretty nasty. I'm like, hey, he's the guy. I didn't say anything, which is probably my fault. I probably should have. That feels pretty bad, but wasn't expecting to feel good. I didn't see the needle. I wanted him to lay down flat, so I didn't want to sit up and look and screw up his procedure. But the needle had to have been like an 18 gauge or something.
I'm sure of it.
I could feel the crunching, through the muscle as he put it in, and then he had to fish it down, and he pulled out like maybe a CC.
Oh,
He
that's
showed
it.
it to me. It was there. There was nothing left to pull out. It's just a big massive scar tissue. Problem is, he hit a nerve, and now I have basically neuralgia paresthetica in my right leg. And my right leg is just, I have to take NSAIDs to sleep at night. It just hurts too much to fall asleep.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's. I mean, other first world problems. The hips are fine. Like hips are like all I have to do is keep from loading them too quickly. But literally right now, my right leg is because I'm just sitting. It's just aching like a mofo.
Yeah.
So
It's funny. We have people commenting about volume. Bad Coyote says Jay Cutler versus Ronnie. How are they now? Case closed. Volume wins. They both did a ton of volume, and they both lifted really heavy too.
Yeah.
They both lifted really heavy.
I don't see the case.
Yeah.
Between comparing those two.
Hey, Tina's with us. What's up, Tina? I met Tina out at Swiss. She came out there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
right
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right. What do you say we get this thing started, man? We'll jump right in because I know you got a bunch of stuff. I'll get your stuff ready over here. Let me make sure I
put onto things just in case. We don't have to cover all the pictures, but just in case the topics rise, I have something to show.
Okay. Let me just make sure that I've got those handy. All right. 4 photos. Okay. Cool. I'm ready to go. Looks like everybody else is ready to go. Tanya's here with us. So everybody is good. We even have some questions coming in about volume, so maybe we can handle those at the end.
Okay.
All right. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally, and all of our programming is brought to you by True Nutrition. Go to truenutrition.com and use our code THINK for high-quality, third-party tested supplements. Lots of great flavors you can choose from, basically every protein powder under the sun. Every carb you can think of, from cheap carbo load that's like $20 for 60 25-gram servings, all the way up to the best highly branched cyclic dextrin that you can get your hands on. Once again, use our code THINK, supplementsource.ca for our Canadians. Great deals that change week to week, so check them out. And, of course, byobbcoach.com. You can get Scott's book there, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. Or do like I did. You can head over to Amazon and get yourself the hardcover. This is a great book. It'll take you all the way through your off season, your contest prep, your peak week, everything else in planning your next season. So check that out, byobbcoach.com. Of course, go to Scott for consultations. You can reach out to him on his website. Reach out to me, mcnallydiets@gmail.com. What's up, Scott? We're going to talk about volume today, right?
Let me say one thing. First of all, no post-it notes do not come with the book. I saw your post-it note in there, so that's good. That means you're reading it. Yeah, that's awesome.
It's
I
actually
finally got a link.
It's not even a post-it note. It is
Something, a bookmark.
It is a $5 Belizean bill. How about that?
Ooh, okay. Wow, that's a special bookmark. That's pretty cool, actually. No, I finally got a link to purchase directly from I'm the publisher technically, but from the printer, and it's so $85. So I could drop the price down. The problem is, like, the format of the description of the book, it looks terrible because instead of having spaces, it has non-breaking space, NBSP or whatever. All throughout the thing. So, it's just trash. It looks terrible. But anyway.
Wait, the book itself does?
The description of the book, you go to that link.
The description. Okay, but not the book. but
No, no,
not the
no, no,
book.
no. It's a
Gotcha.
hardcover. It's the same hardcover. It's coming directly from the printers who provide the book for Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
So it's just you're cutting out the middleman.
If you want,
So
then
it's
send me the link, and I'll post that in the description of the show.
okay. We can. It's also on my link tree on
Oh,
my
perfect.
Instagram. I think I already put up. I just didn't like say, "Here it is," because I look at it, I'm like it's somehow like every time you see a space or like all throughout, you've got all those 5 characters like
Yeah, I
and
understand. I understand.
it's like so I'm like anyway. So it looks kind of crappy, but it's available for people. So. And I didn't do it in time for Christmas. I didn't do it in time for Black Friday.
Well,
It's
that's
just
all right.
finally, well, yeah, I'm not. That's not how I work.
That'll be a late gift. So let's dive into this thing, man. I know you got a bunch of slides here that you sent me over.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? First of all, something to do with volume. I know that much.
I put an Instagram post up 3 or 4 days ago, and all I did actually I took several studies. I can't remember exactly how many. All of looking at quad or vastus lateralis changes in quad and vastus lateralis muscle size, so either cross-sectional area or thickness, that have been published since I think the earliest was 1997, and this latest study, Ennis et al., that came out, the 52 set study that everyone's just talking about. And I put those all in one plot. And actually, you can pull that up right now if you want. It's the one that's got multiple colors. I think it's the first thing I sent you.
Is it this one?
That's the one. Yeah. So this basically, these are just the averages. I put this plot together myself from looking at all the studies. And the interesting thing is you see kind of a dose response pretty much if you're just looking at the averages. And what I have done next to each of those, and people maybe couldn't see this if they're on their phone, maybe if they did a screenshot and then they zoomed in on it, but we do see this sort of from left to right increased muscle growth response the higher the volume you see. But it's not as uniform as people make it out to be. And the most important thing I think that is going missed, and I did see Lyle McDonald put up a quick little rant because he's just kind of disgusted by this. I hope he actually digs in on it because he does a really nice job with that. Intentionally caustic as he is many times. But this Ennis study, which is the yellow one on the bottom right, that's the percent increases in vastus lateralis thickness over their 12-week study.
Okay.
And in these thoughts are in that Instagram post, and I have some other ones that are there too. So there's a number of things I wanted to point out, but one of the things I think that's being missed on that study is one that they worked their way up from 22 sets at the beginning of this 12-week period. They did a really nice job of giving people a deload previous and working them into the training period. So they did a really nice job. I really like the study design. And what they did in the groups, they had 3 groups. One stayed at 22 sets, so that's the leftmost dot. You can't really see it because the lines are right over it. The next one increased by 4 sets every 2 weeks over the 12-week period, and the other group increased by 6 sets every 2 weeks. So they ended up between like 22 sets, staying at that volume, to 37, 38. People say 37. Sometimes people say 38. When I kind of did the set-by-set progression to get my own average, and it came up like 37.8 or something. So,
okay.
But it wasn't 52 sets from the get-go. It was more like 37 or 38 on average, but they worked their way up. And they did 2 reps in reserve on all exercises for all sets until the last set that they trained to failure. And you see this curve. If you just look at these numbers, the averages, it's like, okay, that looks good. Important point here is that if you read, and this is one of the figures I sent you. I wish I could help you fish it out.
That's all right.
It's going to say Ennis et al. On it, and it's going to be a kind of a block of text with some highlighted yellow sections. Not
the
that
yellows.
one.
Okay, I see it. This one. All right.
Yeah.
This one?
That's the one. Yeah,
All
and that's
right.
this is just so we can read it. It says there were no significant group by time interactions in terms of vastus lateralis cross-sectional area. The same was true for the thickness. No group by time interactions. So what that means is they look at the different groups, and if one group changed differently over the course of time, so pre versus post, then there's an interaction. Somebody is doing something from the beginning to the start differently than the other.
I'm
So
sorry,
one,
Scott. I got to back you up, though, man. Can I go back to this? Because before you go further, if I'm lost, I feel like some other people might be lost. I'm still not sure what we were looking at with this first chart.
okay,
So
yeah, perfect.
are
So
these different studies listed along the
these are
bottom
all
then?
each of those lines is a different study, and they've
Okay.
got written next to them what muscle group was studied.
Okay.
So if you look at the very far left, you'll see the Ostrowski study, 1997,
Okay.
with rectus femoris cross-sectional area there.
Okay.
Right. So that's what they measured. That's the study of Ostrowski. It's you have to zoom in on the text. They used trained individuals, so T means trained. They trained to failure, and even in that study, they did not see significant differences for strength or size. Those not. It looks like that. That's the kind of the dark blue line on the
Yeah.
far left.
It looks like it's going way up.
It's
So,
going way up. You're just looking at the averages, right? The problem is we see so much variability that when you run the statistics take in basically the simplest way to think of it is statistics take in the averages into account, but they also take into the variability in averages. So
okay.
I didn't depict that there. Otherwise, this would have been just a giant mess of lines that would have been very, very much more difficult to read.
So how is the
So
line going up then if nothing changed?
those are just the averages. So let's say what that probably means. I'd have to go look at the numbers, but that means there's huge standard deviations. So some people in that leftmost group, so the lowest volume,
Yeah.
which is about 5%, 5.1, I don't know the number, it's around 5%. There are
Yeah.
some people who probably got an 8 or 9% increase, and some people got a 1 or 2, right?
Okay.
You look at the higher volume, where they're at less than 10 sets, I think it was 9 sets per week. There were some people, like the average is above 12. So I'm having to squint to make sure I read the right numbers here. But there were some people who probably were at 4, and there are some people who probably were at 18.
Okay.
So it's all over the place. You've got this huge scatter. So the easiest way to sort of think about this is imagine you got two people who are playing darts.
Yeah.
You can put that down if you want.
Okay.
In case people watch it doesn't, we can pull it back up. So imagine you got two people playing darts, right? And they're both shooting for the bullseye.
Yeah.
And you look at sort of where their darts hit. So they each throw like, a dozen darts, right? And one person, you look at the average distance of all those darts from the bullseye. And one person is 2 inches and the other is 4 inches. You're like, oh, 2's better than 4. That's
Right.
twice as good, 50% closer, or however you want to phrase it. But then you look at all the darts, and darts are all over the place, right?
Okay.
Like one person, like they both have 2 or 3 darts that didn't even hit the dart circle,
Yeah.
right? And some of them, like maybe there's a bullseye, just kind of almost coincident. That's where they're shooting for naturally. So the darts are all over the place. So you look at the darts. Let's say you got yellow and blue darts. You just see this cloud of darts, right?
Right.
But one happens to have an average that's closer. So that wouldn't be considered a significant effect. Now, let's say you throw those darts and you've got one on they're very, very close together. They're really scattered. You've got one and they're scattered like this. Let's say we've got 5 darts, so 5 fingers. And here's the center. One person is like this and the other person is like this. They say the air always in one direction. You would say if this is the midpoint and all their darts are like that,
right?
That's definitely different than this person. If they're overlapped, they've got the same deviation, but they're on top of one another. That's not going to be significantly different. They're both, one was 1 inch and one was 1.2 inch on average.
Okay.
Right? If they're both scattered similarly and one is a half an inch and one is 2.5 inches from the center.
Yeah.
Equal scatter. You're like, well, this person is consistently missing to the left.
Right.
Very consistently. They're all scattered. They're all pretty close. And this person is consistently very close to the bullseye. So the average matters, how close you are to the target, or in this case, how much growth you made on average. But if the scatter is all over the place, then it's like, that's not a consistent effect.
I see.
And that's what statistics take into effect.
Okay.
And that's why, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is the very issue that seems to be being missed in some discussions that I've heard and been told about of this Ennis et al. Study, is those numbers were better. So we can pull the plot back up now.
Okay. The plot, the first one?
Yeah, the first one, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the yellow curve, right? And if you look at those numbers, For vastus lateralis thickness, they also did a cross-sectional area measurement. But you see, like the left is lower, and the curve goes from low to high when it goes from left to right. So more volume gave, on average, more growth, and that's where it's being left, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like 1 inch is better than 2 inches from the bullseye. But the scatter was so huge in that study that there was not a significant effect. And that's the text. That was that other with the text block.
This one
that we just pulled up, and then you wanted some clarification.
Okay.
That's the one. So what I have in there is like there were no significant time by group interactions. That's the first thing, is like, so from the amount of growth experienced by the 3 volume groups that they had did not differ. That's just statistically it didn't differ. Right. And the post-hoc comparisons, so they called a mixed analysis. They decided even do what are called post-hoc comparisons and look and say, well, I'm going to just compare each group just to make sure. Typically, the way I was taught, if you're doing repeated measures analysis of variance, you wouldn't actually do that. You don't really have grounds to do a post-hoc analysis if you don't have an interaction, but that's, neither here nor there. But even that didn't show a gene group. And so, because there's so much variability. So yeah, 1 versus 2 inches on average, but the darts were all over the place. They were equally bad, equally good, because the scatter was so high.
So it sounds like to me this study was trying to set out what the answer is that probably everybody tuned in for, which is how much volume do I need to effectively grow muscle? And what the study is telling us is that it doesn't have any answers.
The study suggests that there is, when you look at it, and so the question that's asked is, can we say in general, with recreationally trained individuals who undergo this really nice regime, they did a really nice job of setting all this up so they kind of equalized everything. They gave a little washout period, so some people weren't dropping their volume down, other people weren't bumping their volume up. They kind of set them all up to be kind of at an equal spot in terms of recovery.
Nice.
And then one group stayed at 22, and the other group added 4 sets every 2 weeks. The other group added 6 sets. So they ended up at 52 sets at the end, which is a lot
of sets.
Right? So the question is, like, can we say with some level of statistical certainty that having more training volume, increasing your training volume in this way, will produce more muscle growth under these circumstances? And I have more to say about that too. This is very important. This has been mentioned in the other things. And the numbers, the averages, if you just look at it like that, it's like, well, yeah, look at the plot. Like those numbers look, it's a bigger number. 2 is bigger than 1. But to be statistically honest, and that's exactly what the authors were, they found no difference because the variability was all over the place.
Okay, I gotcha.
It's just too much. So it's like, is John a better dart player than Bob? And it's like, on that day,
he got lucky.
1 inch on average, he kind of beat him on the average, but like, no. So if you imagine those 2 people playing darts like that, and it's all over the place, right? Yeah. They come in and they play darts every night.
Yeah.
Right. And none of them are like, it's not like John is like, wow, he's really close to the bullseye. Everything's scattered really, really well, closely. Yeah. And Bob's all over the place. They're both kind of all over the place.
Yeah, they're both unskilled guys that are just going to the bar at the end of the night and playing darts, and neither of them have any skill at all. Is what this comes down to. It sounds like
what this suggests. It's actually you don't want to push the analogy or the metaphor too far, but what this suggests is that there's so much variability among individuals that we can't say with statistical certainty the way with the way that we typically judge that, and that's with a certain probability level, that yes, there's a really, really strong statistical probability that you're going to do better with higher volume under the circumstances of this study. So you always have to couch it in that way.
I see.
In this study, they did basically kind of a specialization routine for the lower body.
Okay.
These individuals were training their upper body. They were reckless, so they were training everything as a normal person would. But they didn't track or document the upper body training. They let them do whatever they wanted to.
Okay.
So we don't know. Maybe I missed this, but I looked. I didn't see it. It could have been in that higher group. I can imagine when they're getting to like, oh shit, this week we got 48 sets or 46 sets. Whatever it might be. man, I'm not training upper body at all this past
Yeah.
3 weeks, right?
Yeah. I could see
It's
that.
just I can handle this shit, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
just dying out. I got absolutely no desire to go in and do. Whereas the other group, they're at 22 sets every time. They know what's coming,
Yep.
right? And they may have stayed there, so we don't know what was happening there.
Yeah.
So for some people, for instance, who maybe this is specialization. So if someone's in the situation where their upper body is just tremendous, and they can maintain with greatly reduced volume, this might work really, really well to bring their legs up for some individuals.
Yeah.
For someone who's not, a lot of people aren't going to do this. It's like, okay, here's what I want you to do for the next 12 weeks is barely train your upper body.
Yeah.
And you're going to notice this in the mirror. You're going to wanting to train upper body. Like, who doesn't want to have a beach day where you train chest and biceps or whatever?
Right.
But you're going to go in and you're going to just destroy your legs, and we're going to progressively destroy them even more so.
Yeah.
So,
and now that you're not training upper body, and as a result, then I guess what you're saying too is that all of that recoverability is just going into the one thing that you trained. We had a question last week on blood, sweat, and gear. Somebody said, hey, if I were to want to bring my arms up and say for the next 4 to 6 weeks, I only trained my arms and not overtrained them, but, only trained my arms, took off everything else. Would my arms grow faster? I thought that was kind of an interesting experiment. And of course, my answer was, well, it depends, because maybe if you're a guy that like you're an absolute pro otherwise, but you don't have arms, then maybe that's the icing on the cake and it might give you some benefit. But otherwise, I still would probably give some effort to everything. But that's fascinating. So yeah. And so we're not sure whether or not people changed their upper body training during this. A guy that, if I'm doing 52 sets, man, I'm definitely thinking to myself, I'm just going to coast on upper body for this week.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that is said, and we know this too, is that the more advanced you are, these guys, they're squatting like about 300 pounds, I believe, 1 rep max. So they're pretty strong individuals.
Yeah.
We know that they do a good job of estimating the reps in reserve. So they're leaving 2 in the tank, or going to an RP of about 8, so roughly 2 reps in reserve. And then the last set of each exercise was to failure. But what the thing is that I wish the exercise psychologists would step in and do, and there is another study that we can talk about where they didn't find anything in terms of kind of a feelings index of like how much pleasure they got from the training, is but we know this happens in, for instance, endurance exercise, and this is actually a strategy. If you know you're going to have to go hard for an hour, right? You pace yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I call it sandbagging sometimes, but what we have, and this is a matter of external validity, we do know that you're good at individuals when you say, okay, we're going to do 1 set, or we're going to do, just a few sets. We want to be able to test your ability to gauge your reps in reserve, right? And they can do that in an unfatigued state, right? And in those single solitary circumstances. But when you put someone in a situation where now they know they're going to be doing more volume for a lower body in this case, in a given workout than they've ever done before in their entire life, and each time it's getting harder and harder perhaps, does that ability to does that honesty in accurately assessing the reps in reserve remain? Or do they indeed, and maybe their fatigue, what they're actually willing to do goes down, right? Because they're just psychologically, we have a central fatigue mechanism.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe they still do accurately gauge their reps in reserve because they're just not going to train as hard. They're just not going to go to failure in that same way because they just won't do it. Right. And so there's various ways you can look at this, or maybe they still have the ability when they're 36 sets in to go to failure in the same way, but they just hold back. And what I wish, and this is going to be my dying wish, at some point, is that there's more analysis of the actual training data that goes into this. Because we're doing reps to failure in that last set. So what happens? Like, let's say you've got someone, they're doing back squats. I think they did like a 6 to 8 rep range and a 10 to 12 on the 2 different days of training twice a week. And they're doing, let's say they go, 315, and they do 11 reps, and then they do 10 reps, and they say, okay, this next one, or maybe they do 3 sets like that where they leave 2 reps, and this next one's to failure, and they get 5 more reps, right? Or what I suspect, because they're under the gun, and we know from other psychological experiments, is that when you have an authority figure standing by, your behavior can be affected dramatically.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this has been seen in some classic experiments.
I felt it myself training with like people I looked up to, good pros, and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I can't remember the name. There was studies carried out in New York where they asked people to come in and administer memory tests to individuals. There's a classic name for the study. I can't remember the name, but this is just one. There's the Stanford Prison Experiment, which is related to this, and this is another study where you can find these videos. And people were brought in, but they came in to be paid, and they were told their task was to administer these memory tests to individuals on the other side of a barrier, and they could only talk to them. And so they would say a series of words or whatever, and that person would have to recall that back to them, and it became progressively more difficult. The idea was to see to what extent negative reinforcement either enhanced or diminished recall ability, right? So what they would do then is, if they made a mistake, they'd say, well, I got to give you a little bit of a shock, a little electrical shock. So they would crank it up to X amount of volts or what have you, and then they say, okay, the person goes, ooh, okay, you good to go? Yeah, I'm fine. But there's someone standing there with a clipboard and a lab coat, saying, watching them administer this, right? Just observing the thing, collecting whatever subjective data, and as the person progressively went through this testing regime, every time the person they were supposedly administering the test to made another mistake, they would crank up the voltage a little bit more. And people, because this authority figure was standing by, this is the general theory behind this, they eventually got to voltages or currents, whatever they were doing to increase what's going on, to where people are literally screaming in agony. But they're still, and this is just for a memory recall test, they're still literally torturing these people because it was what they were supposed to do, right?
Was there really a person getting shocked?
There was a person. I think there was a person faking that, but no one's actually getting shocked.
Yeah. Okay.
The people administering the test were actually the subject of the study.
Right.
You need to do this nowadays because you have to tell people what's going on more. But in those days, they were, they didn't know it, but they were the actual. And the test was, how far will you go when someone's telling you what you're supposed to do, or to what extent will you conform to, and this has all sorts of other ramifications outside this. But the thing that's interesting too, that I wonder about training with reps in reserve and training to failure is like, okay, let's say if you're like I said, you're 36 sets in, you're on your last exercise, you're supposed to be stopping 2 sets shy of failure, and then your last set goes to failure. If all of a sudden you do like 6 more reps and you've done the previous set, well, then it shows that you were sandbagging on the previous ones, right?
Yeah.
So what do? You make sure your last set is a failure set.
Yeah.
Right? You're gonna do that. I mean, it would make perfect sense for people to do that, right?
Absolutely, it does.
So there's some. This is why this is sort of a soft science, and they're doing the best thing they possibly can. This is another study that would be wonderful to see. Is and can you get people to do that? Right? You have to measure bar velocity, and you have to be sort of tricky to figure out if they actually are just faking the failure. Like, oh shit, I'm supposed to fail. Oh, and they act like they're failing, right?
Yeah.
So pull up the colorful plot with the different graphs again.
All right. And hey, I do want to make sure before we end things, I want to make sure we get back to this. So for people watching, there's been a number of comments like this one. So let's just hold this for now. We'll come back to it. He says, my experience is similar to a few comments above. Low volume training made me strong, but I had gotten beaten up physically and mentally. So know that I'm seeing you guys. We see you, we hear you, and I definitely want to make sure we get to that one. You said there's a colorful graph?
That first plot was showing all the studies in one.
This one?
Graph.
Oh, not this one. The first one.
Pretty one, yeah.
The pretty one. They're all pretty. This one?
That one's the pretty. That one's the more Christmas-like.
All right.
So we have the orange line in the middle is a study that just came out in 2022. Very, very similar, except using less volume. They didn't progressively increase their volume, but they used less volume. You can see that I think they're like 12 sets or something, 14 sets. No, 12 sets in their lowest group, and then 18, I think 24 were the numbers. And in that study as well, that line looks like it's kind of going down from left to right, right?
Yeah, yeah. The only
But
one.
statistically, it was no difference. It was the same thing, right?
Really?
Yeah, they're the same thing. They actually found, interestingly, an effect for strength that seemed to favor the 18 rep mat or the 18 set condition. So the middle one. So their strength line looked different than their size, right? So that study also did 2 reps in reserve in all sets except the last one, which they trained to failure. And interesting thing is, if you look at just the averages, again, there's problems with doing this, but if you look at just like that average muscle growth for quad thickness, it was about 8% for on the left side, a little bit less than 8. I think it was like 7.7, 7.8. That was at 12 sets per week. That's not too different from the average of 37, 38 sets per week on the yellow plot, which is the Ennis study that we've been talking about so far today.
Yeah.
So you're just looking at averages, looking at those, and not doing statistical analysis. We have a massive amount of overlap because we've got so much variability. But we're also seeing that on average, you can get roughly equivalent averages in terms of muscle thickness increases doing 12 sets a week versus doing an average of 3 times that. And those were both full body training. Well, the OB group was doing full body training as well. We don't know what's going on with the Ennis in terms of the rest of the body.
Okay.
So the other big point here is to kind of keep this all in context. That gray line that stands really high, that's Brad Schoenfeld's study that was, everyone was talking about for quite a while from 2019, where they're doing 45 sets.
Okay.
And they found significant increases. They did find significant increases for size, muscle size, but not strength, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
And up there, we're up close to 12%.
Okay.
That was a thickness measurement, not a cross-sectional area. And those will give you different numbers in terms of percentage gains, because we're talking about a cross-sectional area like a pi r squared if we're talking about circles versus the thickness, which is more like a diameter measurement. Okay. So those are gonna scale a little bit differently. And we don't need to go into the mathematics for that. But if you look at that upper limit there, that's the 45 set per week. On average, that was the highest volume we have. The other set, the Ennis study, they went to 52 sets just for the last 2 or 3 weeks, right? But on average, the average was less than in the Schoenfeld study. But they're up around 12%. If we go way back to 1997 in the Ostrowski study, we have no significant effect, but we do have a number up there where it's close to 12%. It was like, I think I drew the line a little past the dot, but I was trying to make a nice curvy line. It was like 13%. So we've got, if you look at the upper ranges, like look across the top of the graph, we're seeing numbers that are at the top, the blue and the green line, that are just about as high as the gray line. So the numbers are all over the place. If I just left those dots on there and didn't draw lines between them, we'd have like that dartboard with scatters all over the place.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's also important is, for instance, the green plot, the Barcelos. We've talked about this study before. This was the study where they trained 5 times a week, 3 times a week, or 2 times a week. But their chest were doing quad training. So that was a specialization regime as well. So the thing that I think is important here, one, statistical significance. The question that's being asked there is different necessarily than that needs to be addressed. If you're going to talk about a study showing a greater effect, you just got to look at the statistical significance. We got to stick with the way the science is done with statistics. If we're going to try to extrapolate from this study to the general population, what we'd expect if someone did what was done in that study. You just can't say higher numbers, mean more if the stats don't support that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have another, this is always, so now we can look at individuals. Another picture from, it's an Ennis et al. And it just shows, it was the first one I think you pulled up.
Was it just shows this one?
Line. Yeah, that's the one.
All right.
So these are the numbers. This is for muscle thickness. So this is numbers, and these were the percentage there are 95% confidence intervals. So you can look at the delta numbers across the top. This is for the 22 set, the whatever it added up to. I can't remember the number. The adding 4 sets a week. So it was like 28 or 32, I think. And then the 32 set per average. I forget what the middle average was. So this is the Venice study that we've been just talking about mainly. And you see those numbers, right? The averages, they go from 3.1 to 5.3 to 8.9. But look, for instance, at the 8.9 plus or minus 8.1%. So that's the 95% confidence intervals, right? So that basically, if we go 8 or 9, 8.9% plus or minus 8.1%, we're basically capturing almost all of the subjects within the range of 0.8% to 17%. So people range in terms of their percent increases, and actually, if you look at the individual data, it's even wider than that, between 0.7% and 17%. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, you're saying that's the improvement they made was between 0.7 to
that's the
17.
Changes in muscle thickness. Yeah, so a 17-fold spread just looking at the 95% confidence intervals. So if we look below that, those numbers on the right, there we're seeing those little lines. People have seen this. Those are the individual data points.
Yeah. Okay.
And we see some interesting things there. Most of them are going slanting upward from left to right. So the pre and the post.
Yeah.
There's 2 people that went down. Right. So 2 of those folks actually, I mean, they're just individuals, but from the individual perspective, they detrained over that period.
Yeah. Poor people.
Right?
I'd hate to be that guy.
Yeah, and if we look in the other groups, look at the middle and the leftmost plots. Yeah. There are a couple, and there's measurement variability here, so we can't say for sure that they definitely went down because, there's the measurements aren't absolutely precise with 100% precision. But 2 of those lines slant downward. Actually, on the left side, I'm seeing more. There's
3.
So there's 3 of them that are going downward.
Yeah.
Right. So what happened to those guys? Maybe like how did they go down? If this training program was working for them, so maybe that wasn't enough for them. That's kind of the idea. They basically detrained.
Yeah.
Because they weren't doing enough. So we've got all these individual things, worth considering. There's 2 people who potentially overtrained in the upper group, and there's 2 people or 3 people who undertrained perhaps. There's 1 person in the middle group, that one of those bottom lines, the person went down.
Yeah.
And that person was, one of the smallest individuals in terms of at least muscle thickness there where they measured it. So we've got all this variability. And when you look at all those numbers, some people are going up, some people are going down, and you look at these confidence intervals, this variability, it's no wonder. Look at the middle group, increasing 4 sets per every 2 weeks. 5.3 plus or minus 4.6. So that's again the is 0.7.
I'm not sure. What is a confidence interval? I didn't understand what that is.
It's like we can say with basically 95% confidence that we're capturing all 95% of our individuals in between those intervals. So if it's 10 plus or minus 5, that means 95% of people fell between 5 and 15.
Understood. Okay.
5 each way. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure I understood.
It's totally okay. You sometimes do standard deviations. Confidence intervals are basically this is like 2 standard deviations. So it's a nice way of just telling you how much variability is. So if for instance we saw that those numbers instead of being 3.1 plus or minus 4.4%, 5.3 plus or minus 4.6, and 8.9 plus or minus 8.1%, then that's the interesting thing is they had a good effect size there, but they also had a lot of variability. That 8.1% is pretty hard. But if those numbers were 3.1% plus or minus 1.2%, if they all were plus or minus 1.2, 1.3%, then we would have had a powerful statistical effect. Yeah. Because everyone was grouped similarly, that would have been grouped really, really closely, just like the dartboard, like they're hitting in the same spot each time. All of those individuals seem to be adapting very, very similarly, where they're not scattered all over the place. So we don't have some people losing size and some people gaining, and most people gaining size. There was a time effect, so everyone grew on average for this, but some people didn't.
Yeah.
So these poor guys, like, they didn't grow. So let's. I'm trying to think. Let me look real quick because I have some notes, some other things that I put up on my Instagram. See if there's anything worth mentioning here
All right.
that I want to say.
And I see everybody's comments here. I will definitely. We've got a few of them that I've highlighted, so we'll be sure to come back with a couple of questions that are related, including yours, Tina.
Okay, we covered pretty much what I want to. There's one other thing. If you could pull up, it says Haun, Haun et al. 2019.
Let's see. Is that the last one you sent me?
One of the maybe the very last one I sent you.
Yep, I see it. Hold on a second. Oh,
kind of
that's not it. Yep, here it is. Also, I wanted to say we got a super chat here, so thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Sweet.
Yes. There's a character, but we don't have he posted a sticker with it, but we can't see the sticker here at the moment. Here it is though, and thank you very much.
So this Cody Haun study that everyone talked about for quite a good while, that was the first study really to demonstrate this notion of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And I don't want to go there's too many details here. They had a lot of data. They really dug in and analyzed this. But here's another thing that's important. This is another. It's just one of the studies that pops in my head when you really have to look at the caveats. So people now are just saying sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is it's a possibility, and the training regime that was used here was one where they worked with reps in reserve, and they increased volume over the course of, in this case, a 6-week training regime.
Okay.
Right? And what they found, and this is all written on the bottom there, from the training regime was Cody Haun was the first name, was published in 2018. And on average, they found no increase in cross-sectional area from their training. So their training on average was not effective, right?
Okay.
But what they found is from week 0 to week 3, they took measurements mid training regime, that there was actually a decrease in fiber size. Okay. And then from week 3 to week 6, there was an increase in fiber size. So they spent 6 weeks. They lost ground for the first 3 weeks, and they spent 3 more weeks back up, and they got on average back to the same place.
Yeah.
Right. And so what this graph is from a follow-up study where they wanted to basically examine what happened to those people who grew. So each of those bars in that study shows the change in individuals. They looked at all the fibers, regardless of fiber type, and just looked at the cross-sectional area and looked at the changes pre versus post over the 6 weeks. So like that leftmost bar that goes from 0 to like negative 2,800 microns, square microns, that is an individual who really lost some muscle size.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then when you read from left to right, they just a scatter plot, basically. Each of those bars represent individuals' pairs of muscle biopsies, pre versus post, in the subjects. And as those bars, that are negative, that are below the 0 line, as those get closer, that means those are individuals who came back basically to where their pre-training fiber cross-section area was.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, we have individuals, those are the open bars on the right, that were above the 0 line. So those were positive increases in fiber cross-sectional area. So, and you can see there's a dotted box on there, and it says included in analysis, right? So I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I never sort of pointed this out because I think it's really important caveat to this study. This is the study then where they demonstrated this notion of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy as opposed to hyperplasia of the myofibrils, so myofibrillar hypertrophy.
We did a whole episode about sarcoplasmic hypertrophy in the past. I should get that link. I'll put it in the description after we're done recording in case anybody needs to understand that, because that was fascinating. So
I'll probably talk about this. So this is important to note here is, so what they did was demonstrated in those individuals who had and we could go further in because they had some DEXA measurements that suggested an increase in lean body mass over the course of this training for everyone.
Yeah.
But the fiber measurements did not indicate that. So there's just some weird things going on there that are difficult to sort of reconcile at least in my head to some degree. But what's important to note is that they took a training regime that on average was not effective. It's not one that, you could say, give this to 10 people and they're all you'd expect that most of them are going to grow from it, because in this case, on average, they didn't grow from it. Half of them didn't and half of them did. Right.
Yeah.
And then what they did was look at those who did grow, and they included those in their analysis for sarcoplasmic hypertrophy.
Okay.
And that's the big study so far that I'm aware of, at least, documenting this notion of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. But it comes from a study and from a training regime that was not effective on average. So someone might go and say, I'm going to start training that way because I want to, make this a sarcoplasmic hypertrophy specialization period. And they might end up on the left side of that plot if they were on that in that study group. So that's very important. So you can pull that down if you want. That's It's important to look at the studies, look at the statistical analysis, look at where the data came from, and they're doing it so much. It's so much nice, so wonderful to see that nowadays we're seeing those individual plots where you can see the one individual. So that's the answer. That's as much relevant it's more relevant to people who are trying to use this research and apply it. If we don't see statistical significance in the research, then that does not bode well for you getting an effect for something on a personal basis, because on average people don't. That doesn't mean you can't, but if you do see a statistical effect, then that's even better thing. And there's other things to consider. For instance, if they did measurements during the course of the study, like this one, if you did that for 3 weeks, you would see loss to fiber size, right?
Yeah.
You stopped after 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Which many people might have, right? So I know, what would it look like then if they'd taken if they measured sarcoplasmic hypertrophy between 0 and 3 weeks?
Yeah.
They may have gotten a totally different. They wouldn't have had hardly anyone who had hypertrophy, because on average, I don't look at the standard deviation, but on average, everyone lost size in both fiber and on average. So time is something that we can't know about in these studies. So when these studies go on for 12 weeks, we don't necessarily know what happened at 6 weeks or at 9 weeks, and that can be problematic. I bring that up in the that's one of the other plots I have in the Instagram post, showing some individuals losing size at 3 weeks and then coming back and gaining size thereafter, or some people gaining size for 3 weeks and losing size for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it can be that you've got a temporal aspect to this, and we're missing out on what's happening between 0 and 12 weeks or 0 and 8 weeks. It could be that an 8-week regime carried out to 12 weeks is not going to be effective because those last 4 weeks you backslide.
Yeah.
It could be that's great for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. So we don't have that. And unfortunately, this is where I would like to see individual data points for strength, right? Or not strength, but training. What's happening in training for these individuals, right? Are the individuals that are getting the best training adaptations and moving, are those the ones that are growing the best? 1 rep max is a different story than what you're necessarily using in the gym, because you're not training for 1 rep maxes.
For sure.
Unless you're doing those repeatedly. You can just do repeated 1 rep maxes and do no training. You can see the equivalent changes in 1 rep maxes as you see when you're training for just doing regular training, because you're just practicing the 1 rep max test.
Yeah.
There's a lot of neurological component there. So I think that's my insight into this.
This is good.
And, yeah.
And you sparked a bunch of questions too. We got one that just came up, and also a super chat. Thank you very much, Bad Coyote. He's got a question here. He says, wouldn't more volume equal to more increased duration of blood flow, thus allowing more nutrient uptake to aid in recovery and performance overall?
So yeah, just leave that up so we don't. Yep. Yes, you're getting more blood flow the more you train, but there's going to be some replenishment of glycogen, for instance, between sets. If you got plenty of glucose and you elevate your insulin, let's say with an intra-workout, that sort of thing. But having more blood flow when you're training, you're not creating an overall anabolic effect during your training per se, and that blood flow comes very, very quickly down. So people talk about blood volume training, like was one of the ideas. And that's kind of the idea based on getting a pump. So your muscles concerns during training itself, during the actual exercise, is figuring out how to meet the energy demands of the exercise. So you're very catabolic. You're consuming energy. You're consuming glycogen. You're oxidizing fats, especially during your rest intervals. There can be some glycogen replenishment, like I said, under certain circumstances, but just getting more blood flow, that's not turning on. That's not going to be what's going to be turning on the protein synthesis thereafter. That's going to be a function and actually more importantly is the protein balance that you have thereafter. That's going to be a function of the stimulus that you put in place, your particular genetics, having the adequate nutrients around, maybe what other hormonal things you may have employed to make that happen. But just more blood flow. I mean, if you want more, if you're like looking for like time under blood flow or total increase in blood flow, then you could just, get on the knee extension and just do you could do knee extensions they've done that in some glycogen depletion studies. So you just do you could just do cardiovascular training actually. If you want to increase blood flow on average, you probably do. Your VO2 during like really brutal interval or whatchamacallit, where you're going from exercise to exercise, circuit training.
Okay, yeah.
Think about doing it. I can remember what it's called, circuit training, like old school, where you just go from one exercise to another. Like some people do in the gym, they just go and they do every exercise.
Yeah.
So if you do that at like really, really high effort levels, you get to roughly about 60% of a VO2 max, and that's for most people. That's probably below their lactate threshold. If you're an untrained person, that might be your lactate threshold. But that's oxygen consumption, and that's going to correlate really strongly with blood flow. So you're getting, if you want just blood flow, just do cardio. And so blood flow is not the thing that we're gonna see is really important for turning on muscle growth. More blood flow you have from the weight training, the more work you're going to have done, for sure. But it's the work, the quality of the work, and the extent to which that stimulus is right for you. We talked about growing better from high reps versus low reps. Some people doing better with higher volumes versus lower volumes. So it's matching the stimulus and the nature of the stimulus to your own genetics, and then having the recovery, be able to recover from that appropriately. So blood flow is really the last thing I'd be worrying about, except that it's nice to get a pump.
Yeah.
That's a function of blood flow. But but more volume means more blood flow, but that's the blood flow per se isn't the key feature there.
All right, let's move back to these. Like I said, I showed you Steven's question, and I'm going to put up a different one. But just to reiterate what Steven had said, he said, my experience is similar to a few comments above. Low volume training made me strong, but it beat me up physically and mentally. And then it related, and it was actually Bad Coyote posted this one as well. He said, when I tried the HIIT approach to training lower volume, I gained the most strength ever. However, this did not translate to muscle growth in my appearance. When I switched to volume, the change was there. So I'm just seeing a handful of people that are saying, hey, lower volume was an issue for me for one reason or another. Either I didn't grow, or in the case of Steven, he said that he got really beat up by it. How would you reply to that?
Actually, I just got a question like this on my discussion board too from someone,
okay,
who's doing fortitude training. And there's several things. I'm trying to remember all things I responded to, but one, you have to have your nutrition in place, right? So if one thing that some people can do, and you're welcome, Bad Coyote.
It's a bad coyote.
Yeah, it's a bad coyote. It's a bad coyote. Is nutrition has to be there regardless, right? To support your gains. So, and as I just mentioned, some people are going to do better with lower volume, some better with higher volume. Yeah. But if you're getting stronger, you're not increasing your body weight along the way, and you're going to get body fat no matter what. And how the P ratio that everyone has is going to be a function of lots of different things. So that has to go hand in hand. Some people, I just sort of found that, like, especially if this is why Dante has people do cardio in the morning. One of the things he's sort of found empirically, if you're doing DC training and you're sitting around at the desk, you got to have some extra movement in there that allows you to eat more food, and you're balancing out that to some degree with exercise. So your NEAT is higher, or your energy expenditure is higher. In this case, it's sort of formal. He's just doing low intensity walking and that sort of stuff, but it allows you to get more food in. So if you're not if everything else is in place, let's say you take, here's the question I would like to see asked is like, so I was under two circumstances. One, I did for 6 months or a year. I trained with a lower volume approach and I got really strong. And I made sure that I gained a half a pound or 1 pound every week for 12 weeks. And the other one is I did the same thing, except I trained with higher volume. And I made sure I gained a half a pound to 1 pound every week for 6 weeks. Yeah. And then let's say that's 10 pounds under both circumstances. Then what happens to your muscle mass? And let's say you do that. Let's take this, like this, take this one. And like, so someone makes sure that they put on a pound a month every month for 2 years. And in one scenario, they're training with a higher intensity approach. And they go from 200, one twin goes from 225 to 405 on squats for sets of 8 to 10, whatever. Like just crazy growth. Let's make it 315, 225 to 315, so it's not too out of control. And the other guy, he never goes really high. And when you take them both back and you test them with like a set of 10, you know, the guy who trained higher intensity is now he's gained 24 pounds. And the other guy has gained 24 pounds. And the guy who's trained high intensity is squatting 315 for 10 to 12 reps. And the guy who gained 24 pounds, he can only squat 275. For 10 to 12 reps. Some of that is going to be, those are both bodybuilding rep ranges, right? So it's not going to be like, well, one guy just did a bunch of 1RM, so he got stronger. He was training for powerlifting. We're talking about just training in, 6, 10, 8, 12 rep ranges. And the other person did a lot more volume. So that sort of reason I phrased it that way is that I think the theme here is that people are getting stronger with one type of training, but they're not seeing more gains in muscle size. Right. The question is, how long have they done that for? And then also, what, like you are going to have more volume. More glycogen, and thus you're going to notice that when you're eating more food and perhaps storing more glycogen, because if you're depleting the glycogen or reducing it to a greater extent with the higher volume, you're going to have a glycogen compensation or super compensation effect. So that's something you can just notice. And the other thing is also, and no one mentioned this, but you're going to get a better pump. You're going to see this pump, so your perception of what's going on is going to be different when you're in there doing 25, 30 sets and you're getting a pump. Yeah. So
more overall, just kind of like inflamed muscle. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So over the long haul, you compare those two 2-year scenarios. I'm gonna bet if they both of them ensured that 1 pound gain, and the one guy has got 50% greater strength gains or performance gains, let's call them, in the 10 to 12 rep range on squats, and that carried over all of his exercises, I'm going to bank on that guy having more muscle mass.
Yeah, I would too.
If I could say, like 15 reps to higher, it's like all high. 10 to 12 is not that far. Like they're overlapping very close. One person's just doing more volume. Yeah. So that's the question. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's the question. So for those guys, you're seeing more strength and not seeing the size. How accurate was their assessment of size? Was it coming just perceptually? Was it coming maybe for some glycogen going on? And maybe it's a function of not eating enough. And how long did they carry that out for? So that's I could go on and on. I could talk about this for an hour straight probably. Well, I'll stop there. Part one. What were you going to say, Scott?
No, I thought that was. I knew, knowing you for years now. I was excited to ask you about that. I just wanted to share my personal experience, and then experience I've seen working with people, and then also just hanging out with you every other week for the last 5 to 7 years, however long it's been, and just the thoughts I've picked up about training along the way. Years and years back, I tried DC training, very, very low volume, very high intensity, and higher frequency than especially what I was doing before. So I got hurt really quick. I got hurt really quick, and I wrote it off. I said, this doesn't work for me. And guess what? It didn't work for me. And had I actually talked to Dante at the time about doing DC training, he probably would have told me not to do it, because he's always said, too, that DC training is something for a more advanced person. Now, fast forward a number of years, I did a lot of volume for a long time, and I'm talking excessive volume, pushing it to the absolute limits, 3-hour back days and 3-hour leg days. With lots of sets. Yeah, lots of sets. And eventually coming back to high intensity, I got to the point where my best gains and strength were at 1 day on, 2 days off, repeat. So basically training every body part once every 9 days, absolute strongest in my mid 40s, less super supplements than ever. And literally I was at my biggest. Now it was, so I want to say too, that just because something might not work for you now, it might just mean that you're not in the right place for it. It doesn't mean that down the road, because I think sometimes we say, okay, I'm a guy, we look at these charts, we look at these graphs and we say, okay, this is a guy that does better with low volume. This is a guy that does better with high volume. This is a guy that does better with high volume right now. Down the road, that may be different. So I wanted to throw that out there to everybody who was concerned. I'm with you. If right now it doesn't make sense for you to do a low volume program, I'm a big advocate of HIIT style training, but I'm an advocate for people that can actually make the most out of it. With all the top set, back off set that has been so popular over the past few years, thank you to Jordan Peters and guys like him, I've known a lot of younger guys that are getting into that. And when they come to work with me, the first thing I do when I'm looking at their training, if they say they do training like that, I want to see video. I want to see, well, how intense is that top set? A lot of times they would do better with volume. I can see right out the gate because I can tell you're not getting nearly what you need out of such little volume, per workout, that adding more volume in would make up for that. So just remember, I guess my main point is that even though it might not be for you today, doesn't mean it might not be something that benefits you down the road. And one more thing, for me, it wasn't something that I flipped a switch overnight. It came to me naturally. It came to me over a slow period of time. And the way I discovered it was having hurt my shoulder, it just repetitive use, bicep tendon issues. I discovered that if I did 2 exercises for my chest, I could get away with that and my shoulder wouldn't bother me. But if I did 4, by that 3rd exercise, I was feeling it. So I said, well, hey, why don't I train chest twice a week and do half the volume on one day, half the volume on the other? I did that and I got away with not irritating the shoulder any further. And guess what? My chest grew. And I was in a deficit at the time. I came out of a contest prep with people saying, hey, your chest is one of your better body parts. And I never thought it was before that. And it wasn't. So and from there I said, okay, well, I already know how to split legs up. I'll do a hamstring focus day, a quad focus day. So back for me was the big challenge. How do I split my back day up mentally more than anything else? And it over a course of about 2 years, I eventually progressed to the point where it made total sense to get really intense with fewer sets, but then do it more often. That's all. That's all I got to say on that.
No, those are awesome thoughts. Context is so important. That's where this Ennis study was really, really nice, in that they sort of brought everyone back to the same level. They had sort of a washout phase, and then they sort of had a 2-week familiarization phase, and they moved people towards where they were going to have to train to try to put them all on equal footing. That's what happens. I mean, that was one of the things that Mike Mentzer often got so criticized for, is that he would take people or find people like, that's the guy I want to get with, because the guy's doing like 59 sets, for his chest. Like, if I just take him and bring him back down, he's got so much, he's going to have an overreaching phenomenon, and he's just been doing way too much. If he can survive that, that's the thing. If he can survive that, look as good as he does, then I think if I bring him back down and just let him get stronger, et cetera, that he's going to grow. So a lot of the success was not just the nature of his program per se, but that he was picking the right people.
Yeah.
And pulling them from an overtraining scenario, basically.
Yeah, which I think I was in that scenario myself. So it made sense. And then even the guys that I've had great success with doing higher frequency, lower volume, we've switched back at times. Nick Vicolo, who is literally 1 point away from having turned pro this past year. He's really close. Of course, we can always make improvements. And when we went into his off season, we've done a progressive overload with a higher frequency, lower volume for the past 2-3 years. It's worked fantastic. But once he went into his off season, we immediately went back to like a 1 body part per day split. And guess what? Because he had done the other thing for so long, now he's progressed really well with this. He did that for probably, I think, 16 weeks, and between 10 to 16 weeks, and now we're switching back to a more progressive plan again with higher frequency.
And that's the thing too with all of these, like all of these studies, they're all doing. This was another post, the previous maybe post I put up on Instagram, is it didn't get as much feedback, but I just took the clips, I clipped out portions from the method sections of like a half a dozen studies. They're all doing progressive overload. That's the most scientific principle of them all, because they all do that regardless of how many sets, whether they're doing reps in reserve, all sets, or one set to failure, all sets to failure. They're all employing some form of progressive overload, where they're looking at, if you got more reps than was fit in the range, then we brought the weight up. They're doing that in all cases. And I don't see a ton of people. I mentioned this on a podcast I did a few days ago. I don't see a ton of people, posting like videos, flipping through their logbook saying, I've been watching this shit for, 15 years or 9 months or whatever. Yeah. That's the thing that's a part of all of these regimes. And I wonder, one of the things that I sort of got from doing DC training with people and with fortitude training too, is that some people really are attuned to progressive overload. They really want to do that. It really creates a lot of internal motivation, beat the logbook, make the logbook your bitch, all that good stuff. That's something that really drives people, and other people not so much. You don't have to have that there every day. You can just, I've always said, like, an alternative to that is have certain exercises that you come back to every 2 or 3 weeks and just do it's in your rotation, and just do like a single set to test your progress. So, okay, I'm getting better on squats, incline presses, weighted dips, blah, blah, blah. And I want to do better on this is my go-to exercise.
Yeah.
But progressive overload is in all of these regimes, and every single one of them. And I don't see people talking about doing all of their exercises with stretch median hypertrophy type of approach, what have you. But in all those cases, it's always progressive overload. There are some studies where they've left it just the same. There's some interesting studies showing real good muscle growth that way. But for the most part, progressive overload is part of all of it. And one thing I wanted to say too about injuries, because that was the problem that does happen sometimes with DC training. I don't think it's a flaw of DC training, I think, per se, but it's something that I think has somewhat been worked out in fortitude training. And the thing that maybe was getting some people with DC training that I made sure wasn't going to happen in fortitude training is that there's a set of 3 exercises that you rotate through in DC training. Like
okay.
Basically everything. And you have to come back to those, right? And that's the focus. And if you're starting to get some tweaks or aches and pains in those exercises, then so the mindset is like, I'm going to do them anyway. I'm just going to do it. And that's not the smartest way to train. And in one of the things I found with fortitude training, this sounds kind of like an ad, but like it's just something that I've just consistently heard literally from day one the program came out, is that people with lots of aches and pain seem to see those reduce with fortitude training.
Yeah.
And I think it's the stretching, which Dante had, but just extreme stretches. I have alternative stretches, so you don't go into a stretch where you feel like, oh my God, this tendon feels like it's going to snap. You find another stretch. Not that Dante would ever say that.
Right, of course.
But with extreme stretches were an issue where people were doing just like all sorts of crazy stuff. They were just going like beyond going into maniacal levels of like, I got to try to do a dumbbell stretch with the 200-pound dumbbell.
God.
Just people hurting themselves. And part of the program, I put fail safes in there to do the other types of stretches. And then also there's so much auto regulation of exercise. So you do have the loading set exercise you come back to, but you're free to change those if ever they don't feel like they're not working for you. And the other exercise. So I think there might be somewhat the stretching, doesn't pan out in the research. Stretching prevents injuries. But I think you can train heavy and progressive, which is what the main principle of fortitude training. But there's a lot of variability in there, a lot of variety, and you're also doing a lot of stretching. And something about fortitude training seems to have remedied that. And, some of it may just well be psychological. It's not that you can't do DC training without getting injured a lot, but maybe the fact that it's a daily undulating periodization type of regime where you do have heavy training and then you do have lighter training as well, and you rotate through those is somehow helpful. And that's a whole other topic, but the injuries can be avoided. But you got to be smart. Dante himself says after the age of 35, you're doing DC training, you need to up your reps. Don't try to be to do 6-set, deadlifts from the floor, when you're 48 years old.
Well, when I first tried DC, that's when I got hurt. I got hurt frequently, and that's why I finally just threw it away and said, this isn't for me,
Yeah.
which it really wasn't at the time. But coming to it later, I felt that because I was using perfect control in all my work, like, you know what I mean? Like I never lifted a weight. To me, progression didn't mean putting another 5 pounds on, picking up a 5 pound heavier dumbbell. It meant getting better reps. My progression, I measured it in very minuscule, very strict ways. Maybe I got, say I lifted the 120 pound dumbbells and I got 10. Well, now that's time for me to go to the 125s. But instead, I would look at my video, because I'd shoot video of it, and I'd say, well, you know what? I could have been better controlled in the last 2 reps. So instead of going up, why don't I shoot for using absolute perfect control in rep 9 and rep 10? And if I can do that, if I can absolutely perfectly own a weight, then the likelihood of me getting hurt by going up 5 pounds from that is going to be, very low. So I think that was a big help for me. And then not having the repetitive wear and tear. I remember I interviewed, Nick Walker, and I think it was right before I think it was right before he turned pro. And he talked about going to a higher frequency, lower volume approach, progressive overload. And a lot of people were saying, well, he's going to get hurt doing this. And he said, well, actually, I feel a lot better. He said, my joints feel a lot better. My tendons don't ache. And I found the same thing with high volume. I got a lot of repetitive use injuries that just added up over time. Versus progression, I did get hurt once, but I mean, it was far less often than it had been previously. And very few aches and pains. My joints never hurt doing it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I actually logbook, I like that idea of progressing in terms of the quality of the reps.
Yeah.
One of the things I've done in my logbook, almost as long as 20 years, as long as I can remember, because I have always had the tendency, I get pretty amped up and I like to just like fire into a set. And sometimes I'll my tendency in the past was just blast with the reps really fast. I'm like, I get so, especially on big exercises, and I just like rip into a set,
Yeah.
And then at the end, I just want to get more reps, and my form would tend to go to shit,
Okay.
Been much better at that now in the last 15, 20 years. And never really had a situation like, oh, that was what caused me an injury, to be honest.
Right.
I've had injuries that have always been like weird things. I don't notice. Like with my quad tears, I never like a little pop like during a stretch or whatever. It wasn't like, that was obvious because you were being sloppy with your form. Or you
right.
Too much weight. But the thing I would do, let's say I did I did 12 reps. Let's say I did 12 reps and then I failed attempting the 13th. Mm-hmm. But when I did, I'm honest with myself. And I'm actually overly honest with myself. What I would write if the last 2 reps weren't perfect form and what I consider in terms of range of motion, or maybe I threw some extra body English in there, whatever, I would write 10 plus 2 plus 0.
Okay. Yeah.
That's just you can use any convention you want, but that means I did 10 good reps. I tried 2 more, but I'm being honest with myself. Those were reps, but they weren't good. And I failed at the other one. So what that would mean then is that if I could come back and do 11, not that I want to do add crappy reps to the end of my set, but I know it's not always that way. Sometimes I just write 12 or 13 or 14 or 8 or whatever. But if I do have crappy reps like that, I add that in. So for me, an improvement would be 11 plus 0.
Yeah.
Because I got 11 good reps, right? But I also note that too, just to catch myself. It's like, okay, you're getting sloppy on this exercise. You keep on adding in these crappy reps because you're trying to beat the logbook, no matter what, or you're training a little bit out of control. So catch yourself. Like, okay, it's a little slap on the wrist when I write those. I don't like to write those in my logbook, but it's a little slap on the wrist for myself.
Yeah.
It also tells me that it can be indicative that, okay, so I'm doing lots more sloppy reps for some reason because I'm trying to beat the previous numbers, but I'm not really able to. I'm not able to get more total reps unless I do crappy ones at the end. And it also tells me, it's like, okay, what am I like? I can look at the global picture, but it's like that wasn't just a set of 10. That was a set of 10 plus 2 forced reps,
right?
That I didn't get. Essentially, kind of like a forced rep. So it's like, make note of that, Scott. So sometimes what I do, like I auto regulate my volume the way, just like in fortitude training, but I start doing it more intuitively now. So there will be sometimes when I just don't do certain exercises. Like I put up a back workout a few
Right.
days ago, and there's some of those exercises like I would not do. Like if I did a drop set, I might do only a 2-stage drop set, or I would not do like one of the isolation exercises. I just wouldn't do it.
Okay.
And so if I go and I see like, the previous workout, like everything's like 10 plus 2 and 11 plus 3, like I'm just like adding all these sloppy reps, like, okay, it's a different set when you're getting where I'm getting to where I have to try in order to get another rep, I'm having to cheat it.
Yeah, it is.
That's a poor return, potentially a poor return on investment.
Yeah.
That's a high stimulus, but that also is an inroad to recovery. What they're kind of calling fatigue now. I hate to use that word, but that's a more fatiguing in terms of what it's doing to my recovery thereafter than just a regular rep.
Yeah.
So if I do 4 exercises, then all of them have like cheat reps on the end. That's different than doing 4 exercises where I'm doing clean, and then when I don't get a good one, that's it. So that's a different type of. Those are extra. It's like doing drop sets. You can't compare a drop set versus straight. This is the other point I think is probably worth making now because I'm kind of talking about it, is that exercise in that workout that I posted. Let's remember what I did. I did a DC style rest pause set with lat pull downs.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they cut it off. I had the whole thing on there, but it cuts you off after a minute. So I had, because the sets take like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I did a static hold at the end, and then I did row stop deads, which is my.
I saw that video. I did. Yeah.
That's a great. I wish more people do that exercise.
It's brutal, man.
It really is. We did it right way back when. Because you sent me that video that you found the other week. Yeah. And then I did. What else did I do after that? I did a set of stretchers, and I did some shrugs because of my hips. I'm not supposed to be picking up heavy weights, so I'm doing the row stop dead. So I'm limited to like 2 1/4. I can go up this week, I think. So I did like a rest pause set of deads, and then I did biceps, a rest pause set. So, and with a static too at the end. I can't remember quite. I have to look at my book, but if you look at the research literature, and this doesn't apply to, we've been talking about leg training so far, but if you look at the research literature, that rest pause set for the pull downs and that drop set, which was a triple drop set, so 3 stages total. How do you count that set wise? First of all, those aren't straight sets. So if you're doing intensification techniques like any type of cluster set, a muscle round, a rest pause set. Someone asked me a question about myo reps. How do you compare myo? What's the effect of hypertrophy on myo reps versus this and the other? It's like it hasn't been compared. It's going to depend on the person. How many sets is a triple drop set?
Yeah.
Because I went, and you didn't see those other ones, but I dropped down like 20 pounds, and I think I got like 3 or 4, and then 2 or 3. Okay. And those were all quote unquote effective reps, but those weren't sets. Those weren't the same as straight sets. The total work done was paltry. If I went and rested, I could have gotten maybe 10 reps instead of 3, right? So how do you count that? And people are wanting to then, I get questions all the time, like because they're trying to figure out a volume prescription based on these studies. So it's like, well, if I'm going to do 52 sets, like does my triple drop set count for 1 set or 3 sets, right? Or does it even count for 5 sets for an individual? Because when they go to failure and they're doing those really, really difficult grinder reps at the end that really dip deeply into their ability to recover, maybe doing a triple drop set has a greater effect on their recovery ability than doing 5 sets with 2 reps in reserve, right? They get a little bit of effectiveness out of those last couple reps in each of those sets. So they do 5 times, they get 10 effective reps, so to speak. They get some effective time under tension, what we're calling it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't rip into their recovery. They're like, this is no big thing. I got some good stuff in there. I've got a nice pump that feels good. I'm good to go. As opposed to they do the triple drop set and they feel like their brain's going to explode at the very end because they're not only are they going to failure, they're just 0 reps in reserve. They're actually having a failure rep where they can't do anything and they're struggling with it for a second or 2.
Yeah. So
they're adding up like those really, really tough grinders. It's like, so how do you compare that? That was 3 sets, but you only did 18 reps. it was one drop set for 18 reps, but like you had 8 of them were really effective.
Yeah.
Right. Versus 10 effective reps, but much less difficult over 5 sets. So was it 3 sets, 5 sets, 1 set versus 5 sets? Like, so you run it, if you're trying to, the bottom line from all that is like taking studies where they're doing straight sets and then trying to take that information and bring it over and directly apply it in some mathematically equivalent way is going to be a very hard algorithm to figure out, especially because we've got so much variability amongst individuals. And then we have your particular ability to recover from those high effort sets and how much effort you're willing to put in.
Yeah.
Are you willing to go until someone put a gun to your head? You couldn't get another rep? Is that how hard you train? Like where people look at you in the gym, like this guy, his wife must have just caught his wife in bed with some other guy or something. There's something wrong with this dude, right? He is angry.
Yeah.
He is pissed. He's motivated. And some people, they're having a, like, hold on just a sec. They put their cell phone down. They do their call and they pick up, there's no big deal. So anyway, the question, I just continue to get it. Some people are like, oh, why would they ask that question? But I literally get that question all the time. How do I count sets on muscle rounds compared to straight sets? And you have to, the overarching feature here is that you have to auto-regulate for yourself. And that's when it comes to heavy training too. Like if you're doing a DC style thing, or if you got someone who's got great recovery ability, Dante would have them do more.
Sure.
If someone can handle it, he'd have them do more.
Yeah.
That's what I would do with someone. Like one thing that happened with DC training is like the standard way for the 2-way split was do 2 straight sets for squats and then do a Widowmaker.
Right.
So a heavy set and then a back off set. Typically, the heavy set back off set is actually Dante's the one who made that. I think pretty popular. People forget that, but that's a standard, and that's a standard for rows. So rack deads, bent over rows, that kind of stuff, and for doing compound quad exercises like squats, leg presses, etc. But so you do 2 heavy sets and then do a Widowmaker for DC training. And what happened along the way is some people who train really hard were like, I can't recover from that. It's just too much. So they started doing that. And these are people who are just training beastly hard. And then everyone's like, well, that's just the way to do it. And I'm like, actually, the way Dante first had it is you do 2 sets and then you do it. So you're doing a total of 3 sets for squats. But, and so people just started doing 1 and doing less. And then, so they aren't auto-regulating. So you need to auto-regulate your heavy training too. And you need to auto-regulate around aches and pains and injuries. People are having, like, they go in and, they bust their knee squatting, something like that. Well, that sucks. That's just a bummer.
Yeah.
That would be from trying to train too hard or what have you. Like there's just freak accidents sometimes, but it's also, you have to be smart with picking your exercises. So if deadlifts off the floor is something like, hey, you got to do them. They're DNA changers. My favorite name for deadlifts, right? Someone gets good at those, like over time. It transforms someone's physique. If you get someone who's really strong on deads, it's totally visible. The traps will be just crazy gigantic. But if you keep on doing those and they feel awkward the entire time, and when you're getting close to a failure rep on a deadlift, and you're starting to blow your back and everything's getting wonky and you just that's not the right exercise for you. You got to auto-regulate away from that. And you pick the ones that work. That's another question I got just on that Instagram was, what are the right exercises? It was about the row stop deads. Is that an exercise for DC training? I said it could be or couldn't be. I think that's an exercise that everyone could probably benefit from because it's different than any other back exercise. It's just, I think it's a beautiful, and it doesn't include stretch, median hypertrophy. But I tell you what, do that. How sore was your back after you did that one time?
Oh, brutally. I was trying to find the video a minute ago. I don't see it offhand. I saw the video of you, but I don't see the row stop deads. And I remember I was already kind of smoked, and it was humbling because I could not use that much weight on that movement.
You can't. So, anyway, do we have any more questions we need to get to?
We had a few things that were kind of getting off topic and stuff, but honestly, we were about out of time here. We're about ready to wrap this thing up. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and I'm going to try to go back, get some timestamps in this later for anybody watching live that wants to revisit. Of course, check out the book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. Go to byobcoach.com. Reach out to Scott over there as well for consultations. And go to Amazon to get the hardcover, or you're going to send me a link where you can just buy it directly. Don't pay attention to the website you're buying it from. Apparently the description and stuff is all messed up, but you will get the book and you'll get it without having to go through Amazon and all that.
It's cheaper.
Yeah, and it's cheaper. Awesome. Save $5. Plus
15.
Okay, nice. That's a heck of a deal then. And go over to truenutrition.com, guys, and use our code THINK. You can get everything from micronized creatine monohydrate to the latest cutting edge in carbohydrate technologies like cluster dextrin. You get the real pure thing. You're not paying the price of cluster dextrin only to get 15 grams of cluster dextrin per scoop with 10 grams of sugar in it. You can actually get the legit 25 grams per scoop there. And if you want to add sugar into it, you can do that later, but do it for the cost of sugar. That's what bothers me is I see so many products now that are claiming they're highly branched cyclic dextrin. When you flip it over, it contains 10 or 15 grams, and then it contains 10 or 15 grams of dextrose. That's good. I like the combination, but don't charge me for a highly branched cyclic dextrin scoop if you're only giving me a half a scoop. That's a whole other topic. Use our code THINK over there. And of course, supplementsource.ca for Canadians. Reach out to me, mcnallydiets@gmail.com. And of course, fortitudetraining.net. You can reach out to Scott there as well. And you can hit Scott up for consultations. We appreciate everybody on the live feed. You guys are freaking awesome. We do this every other week. So tune back, not this next Sunday, but the Sunday after that. And we'll be here to hang with you and answer questions. Thanks everybody for tuning in live. See you, Scott.